Hello and welcome back to the cockpit of the A-18 Hornet. We are continuing our quality control with the DCS F-18 Hornet flight school that I've been working on. I'm dragging my feet on this whole thing. It's a lot of stuff that needs to get done to it, and I just I'm struggling to motivate myself to do it. So I'll get to these when I get to these. As I've said, for all of my DCS content, it's one of those things where it's a lot of work that you have to do just to learn how to do things, and then this project here is just a lot of extra work on top of that. So I make no promises. I know there's some of you who have been saying that you really want to see this come to fruition. So you know, it'll come eventually, but I make no promises as to the timeline. But anyways, today we're going to be doing QC on the airfield pattern lesson that we have done. I set this up as a carrier landing practice that you would do at an airfield. So let's go ahead, hop in, and we'll see if there are... Oh, you know what? I need to make sure that I get my notes up. I have notes. I have a note thing somewhere. I got to remember where it is, though. Campaigns... audio, notes. There we go. Gotta be able to make sure I take notes. Okay, here we go.
Welcome to your first day of training. In general, you will have 2 lessons per day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, with the occasional night flight thrown in for the experience. In this morning's lesson, we're going to practice a modified version of the landing pattern for the Hornet. Be advised that this is not the typical landing procedure when returning from a mission, but is rather the recovery procedure from a missed landing attempt on the carrier, whether from being told to go around, wave off, or touching down on the deck but missing the arresting wires, bolter. For today's training, Vatsiani has been closed to traffic so we can focus on just flying a proper pattern, so no radio calls will be required. Go ahead and get the aircraft started and then taxi to the right and approach the active runway. Stop just before the runway threshold for further instructions.
I apologize in advance for the head tracking. One of the reasons I've really been dragging my feet on all of this is because I don't have a very good head tracking solution. So I'm using the OpenTrack software, which, you know, works for the most part, but...
Roll left, roll left!
I don't know, it's just kind of eh.
Flight controls.
Okay, how do I need to get out of this. Okay, thank you. And I'm trying to get out of this to bring up my OpenTrack, so maybe I can fix some of this jitteriness. It's a little better, kinda, sorta. I'm gonna move the dead zone for some of this stuff out a little bit more. So that way, hopefully, it will only move when I want it to move. Okay, that's a little better. Get ourselves all set up with our menu stuff here. Stored heading. Left engine crank. Reset the FCS. Reset the thing. This is one of the reasons I don't like this OpenTrack software, is that no matter what solution, no matter how precise the the like hardware that I'm trying to use or whatever it is that I'm doing, it has this drift component to it that just will not go away. No matter what I do, no matter what settings I try to set. I was using my phone's accelerometer to try to like make this better, and it's just I can't figure out a way to get nice crisp moving, and you know, you'll move it somewhere and then it drifts around for a little bit. So I'm just using the camera at this point because this is definitely worse than using my phone, but it's not much worse. And at least now I don't have to have something on my head. So let's try to speed up time here to get the... Yeah, there we go. Well, hold on. Let me verify that that actually did what I wanted it to do. Does it say okay? Yeah, I did not say okay. All right, so now we have our information, now we have our stuff set up. Let's go ahead and get ourselves over to the taxiway. Okay.
Okay, stop here. Before we get started, We need to be able to gauge our distance from the ground very accurately, so let's change our altimeter to radar mode by flipping the switch just below the UFC from bar to RDR. Understand that this is still just a rough estimate, as the ground will be rolling up and down below you, but we need AGL references and the radar altimeter is the only way to do that. The sequence of events for the pattern will be as follows. Take off from the runway as we did in the last lesson, but this time use full afterburner. This simulates using full thrust to recover from a failed carrier landing attempt. Climb to an altitude of 600 foot AGL and bring your airspeed to around 350 knots. At about a mile from the airfield, reduce throttle to idle and execute a steep turn to the left. Keep the velocity vector on the horizon and keep your G-meter between 2.5 and 3 G at first, then slowly allow it to taper off as you near the end of the turn. Once you reach a heading of 300,
number 4 is
level
not
off
in there.
and work on getting your velocity vector aligned with the E-bracket, just like we did for landing in the last lesson. Remember to keep the velocity vector on the horizon with pitch trim and bring the E-bracket down to it with throttle adjustments. The E-bracket chases the velocity vector, not the other way around. I'll notify you when it's time to turn for your final approach. Just focus on getting on the proper downwind and setting up your aircraft for landing. When you're ready, taxi out onto the runway and begin your takeoff.
Okay, my disclaimer right now is that this is a testing environment, not necessarily trying to show off my ability to execute this stuff. Although I can, it has been a little bit since I've flown this pattern, so I make no promises as to the quality of the flying here. But we'll do our best. We'll do our best to try to adhere to it, but mostly I want to test out and make sure all the triggers and stuff work the way they're supposed to be working. Okay, 300 and some odd knots. Why is my radar altimeter?
You're about a mile from the runway, so go ahead and reduce throttle to idle and execute a steep left turn, pulling back sharply on the stick and doing your best to keep the velocity vector lined up with the horizon. You're aiming for about 3 Gs followed. You should be about halfway through your turn at this point. Don't forget to lower your flaps and landing gear once your airspeed is below 250 knots.
Oops.
Level out at a heading of 310 and get your aircraft stabilized with the velocity vector on the horizon.
Start getting some pitch trim going here to keep ourselves level with the ground. I really gotta slow down here.
You're within the downwind corridor, so focus on keeping the velocity vector on the horizon with pitch trim and bringing the E-bracket down to it with throttle. Try to stay around. You're a little right of the optimal downwind trajectory. Adjust to the left until you're about a mile from the runway. Keep your velocity vector on the horizon with pitch trim and bring the E-bracket down to it with throttle adjustments. Try to keep the aircraft at around 600 foot AGL.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's stuck. It's set to radar altimeter, so I'm not sure what the deal is. All right, so we got the good downwind and the to the right downwind, so at least we know the triggers left and right are working.
In a carrier landing, you'd be able to see the stern of the ship. This is where you would normally begin a 30-degree descending turn to the left, but if you need a bit more wiggle room, feel free to continue further out before you begin. Once you start turning, add some power to compensate for the loss of lift and try to keep the velocity vector just below the horizon. Remember that the stick should only be used for roll adjustments. Pitch is controlled with the throttle during landing. Keep your eyes fixed on the HUD. You should be about halfway through your turn by now.
No real way to
so
test all that
if you're doing it properly. And start making adjustments to line up with the
narration anyway.
Once you're lined up, focus on placing your velocity vector and E-bracket on the runway numbers. You should be making constant throttle adjustments all the way to touchdown to keep the velocity vector on the sweet spot. If your
Alright.
throttle hand
In a carrier
stops
landing,
moving,
we'd be landing at an angle like this, so it is a little bit weird, but
throttle motion fore or aft, depending on whether you need
the
to
purpose
move
of
the
this is
velocity
just to
vector
practice
up
the
or down.
pattern, not necessarily for it to be the
Failure to
most
keep the
realistic
throttle
thing in the
moving
world.
will likely result in getting behind the aircraft, a bad situation. For the purposes of this lesson, a good landing is anything close to the numbers. Good job.
Okay, good landing.
If you'd like to keep practicing, add full afterburner and repeat the process.
Yeah, it's really frustrating that my radar's not giving me the reading I'm supposed to get.
End the lesson.
It's stuck as if I'm... I think we damaged our landing gear. It's stuck as if it's, like when you get really high...
You're about a mile from the runway, so go ahead and reduce throttle to idle and execute a steep left turn, pulling back sharply on the stick
I'm gonna try to cut it too short. We're just gonna have to deal with the beeping. I'm sorry.
You should be about halfway through your turn at this point. Don't
I want to make sure we're too close to the runway and make sure we get that
your
warning.
airspeed is below 250 knots.
Because he should tell you that you're
Level
left of
out
the
at a
downwind
heading of
trajectory if you're too close to the
310
runway
and
there.
get your aircraft stabilized with the velocity vector on the horizon.
So, not much I can
Looking
do.
good. You're within the downwind corridor, so focus on keeping the velocity vector on the horizon with pitch trim and bringing the E-bracket down to it with throttle. Try to stay... You're a little left of the optimal downwind
So all of the
trajectory.
warnings work the way they're supposed to. Let's try to
Adjust
do...
the right until you're about a mile from
Let's
the
try to do
runway.
either a short or a long
Keep
landing.
your velocity vector on the horizon with pitch trim and bring the E-bracket down to it with throttle adjustments. Try to keep the aircraft at around 600-foot AGL.
Not...
At about this point in a carrier landing, you'd be able to see the stern of the ship. This is where you would
the
normally
gear's
begin
broken.
a 30-degree descending turn to the left, but if you need a bit more wiggle room, feel free to continue further out before you begin. You should be about halfway through your turn by now, so take a quick peek at the runway and start making adjustments to line up with the center line. Once you're lined up, focus on placing your velocity vector and E-bracket on the runway numbers. You should be making constant throttle adjustments all the way to touchdown to keep the velocity vector on the sweet spot. If your throttle hand stops moving, you're doing it wrong. You should be adjusting the range of throttle motion fore or aft depending on whether you need to move the velocity vector up
there
or
isn't
down.
much more we can do
Failure to keep the
with
throttle
this, with
moving
the
will likely
landing gear
result
stuck
in
where
getting
it
behind
is.
the aircraft, a bad
Because
situation.
I can't land. We're not going to be able to land with it stuck like this.
A good landing is anything close to the numbers.
We can do an overflight to make sure that the "oh, you didn't land" thing works, I guess, to see make sure that that's actually going. Because once you get a certain way down the runway, as long as you hit the trigger for the landing, it'll give you the warning for that. I think I missed the trigger though, so let's we'll swing around and try to grab the trigger again. If I don't crash. Yeah,
You're a little left of the optimal downwind trajectory.
Unfortunately, I broke the landing
Looking
gear,
good.
so not much I can do.
You're within the downwind corridor. You're a little right of the optimal downwind trajectory. Adjust to the left until you're about a mile from the runway. Keep your velocity vector on the horizon with pitch trim and bring the E-bracket down to it with throttle. At about this point in a carrier landing, you'd be able to see the stern of the ship. This is where you would normally begin a 30-degree descending turn to the left, but if you need a bit more wiggle room, feel free to continue further out before you begin. Once you start turning, add some power. You should be about halfway through your turn by now, so take a quick peek at the runway and start making adjustments to line up with the center line. Once you're lined up, focus on placing your velocity vector.
So there are trigger zones a little bit before and a little bit after the optimal landing area that should let you know, hey, you landed short. And they worked before when I went through this. This QC stuff is less to test the mechanics because I know those work. It's more to just make sure that the narrations and stuff are saying what they're supposed to say, and that you can't really cheat the system too much. But looks like this is going to be about as much as we can get done because I broke the landing gear and I'm not reloading this mission. So
for the purposes of this
hopefully you guys got something out of that. I'm relatively sure that this mission is fine. I did a lot of QC in the first couple of blocks of training. as I was making them. Mostly I'm just trying to make sure that the narrations work. So if you notice something weird with the narrations that I didn't catch as we were going through this, please let me know in the comments. I'm mostly doing these videos to kind of hopefully motivate myself to actually sit back down and finish this thing, because I would like to finish it and actually get it up for sale. You know, this could be an additional income stream in addition to my YouTube channel that could help make me more of an independent person and not have to go back to a regular job. So that's the point of all of this. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you got something out of it. Be sure to click that like button if you did. Subscribe to the channel so that when the next video comes out, it will show up in your feed and you'll be able to watch it. And if you would like to support the channel, you can become a channel member by clicking that join button. Check out the list of options available there and decide if any of those are right for you. And if you're not interested in a membership, you can still support the channel with that thanks button. It's sort of YouTube's version of a tip. So again, and direct contributions like those are greatly appreciated. They are a critical component to helping to turn this into a full-time gig, which is the dream. So again, thank you very much for your time. Be sure to come back for the next one, and I'll see you then.